Okay, so today let's talk about the great and honorable John Brown. John Brown is actually one of the greatest heroes of all of the African Americans and all of the history of the US. Strangely enough, this white man has almost done more for or was willing to spill more blood over the cause of freeing blacks than anyone else was. John Brown, let's get into it. Some of you may have heard of John Brown, some of you may not. John Brown was John Brown was what some would call a madman. Some would say he had a death wish. He was so keen on bloodshed of to free the black slaves that he was willing to die for it. Most of all the African American leaders like W.E. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass and such, they were willing to speak up for blacks, but they weren't ready to die for blacks. John Brown was ready to die for blacks. He was ready to arm blacks and start a full out insurrection and rebellion against the United States of America. John Brown was, and when you have revolutionaries like that, they have to be crazy. They have to be willing to put their life down on the line, in which John Brown was. On October 16th, 1859, John Brown led a small army of 18 men into the small town of Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His plan was to instigate a major slave rebellion in the South. Now, John Brown had been planning this for over 10 years. He had been trying to rally up the slaves and make friends and plan this out for years. He would seize the arms and the ammunition of the federal arsenal, arm slaves in the area, and move south along the Appalachian Mountains, attracting slaves to his cause. He had no rations, he had no escape routes, so they say. So John's Brown plan was to move into the South, take over plantation by plantation, arm the slaves, and gain more and more troops. And they were prepared to go to war with all of the states who were pro-slavery. This was his plan, and it would have been successful had niggas had not have been scared. Negroes have always, for the most part, been scared of rising up. But John Brown was not scared. John Brown, born May 1800, died December 2nd, 1859, was an American abolitionist leader, first reaching national prominence for his radical abolitionism and fighting in Bleeding, Kansas. He was eventually captured and executed for a failed incitement of a slave rebellion at Harper's Ferry preceding the American Civil War. An evangelist Christian and strong religious convictions, Brown was profoundly influenced by the Puritan faith of his upbringing. He believed he was an instrument of God, raised up to strike the death blow to American slavery, a sacred obligation. Brown was the leading exponent of violence in the American abolitionist movement. He believed that violence was necessary to end American slavery since decades of peaceful efforts had failed. So he had sat around watching them discuss peacefully and debate over if whether slavery should be ended or not for years. So he became convinced that it can only be done by bloodshed. Brown said repeatedly that in working to free the enslaved, he was following Christian ethics, including the Golden Rule, as well as the U.S. Declaration of Independence, which states that all men are created equal. He stated repeatedly that his view, these two principles meant the same thing. Brown first gained national attention when he led anti slavery volunteers and his own sons during the Bleeding Kansas crisis of 1850s. The state level civil war over whether Kansas would enter the Union as a slave state or free state. He was dissatisfied with the abolitionist pacifism, saying that saying of pacifists, these men are all talk. We need is action. Action. In May 1956, Brown and his sons killed 5 supporters of the slavery in the Potawatomi Massacre, a response to the sacking of Lawrence by pro-slavery forces. Brown then commanded anti-slavery forces of the Battle of Blackjack and the Battle of Osawatomie. Now, John Brown had met with Frederick Douglass, where they had discussed his plans, and he wanted help from Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass did not want to openly support John Brown because he didn't want to ruin his image by, just openly promoting John Brown, a person who was keen on bloodshed and killing pro-slavery uh, individuals. So some sources say that Frederick Douglass didn't help him. Some will say he didn't, but some of the most valid sources say that he did help him somewhat, but wouldn't openly support him. In ways that he did help or support John Brown, that I do not know. So here you have this is part of the conversation from what Douglass thought after this conversation with Brown. But Douglass, who used to hold some of the same views, has really evolved to a different level. And what he believes is that to fight slavery is not just to fight those groups of people, those are not your only enemies. To fight slavery means to fight the United States. If you want to wage this war against slavery, you have to gear up and understand you are fighting America, or you're going to have to win America over to the side of the abolitionists. Those are your two options. So basically, Frederick Douglass was kind of scared. John Brown was about that action. He was about that bloodshed. He was ready to lay his life down for the cause of freeing blacks. Frederick Douglass was not. Frederick Douglass was only for the cause of speaking up or education. These are two different types of people. So let's talk about when John Brown met the great Harriet Tubman. Brown was awestruck when he met Tubman. He introduced her to his friends as General Tubman. He called her one of the best and bravest persons on this continent, drawing on what geographer Nick Henyon called her deep spatial knowledge and access to clandestine resources, or whatever it say. She helped plan the Harper's Ferry raid and recruited formerly enslaved people in Canada to join the cause. Now, I don't know how true that is. You got to this source that I'm getting it from, I'm not even quite sure about this. There's various sources that say different things. Apparently, John Brown helped on the Underground Railroad with Harriet Tubman, and supposedly Harriet Tubman would not openly support John Brown, just like Frederick Douglass wouldn't. But some say she did aid him with a few men, but I don't really think it was a significant amount, or maybe they never showed. John Brown believed he was protected by God, and that might explain some of his naivety. He thought that once his small band of guerrillas occupied the armory of present day West Virginia, news would spread and inspire a mass uprising of enslaved people who would run to the armory and pick up guns. When he tried to recruit Frederick Douglass to the cause, Brown reportedly said, "When I strike, the bees will begin to swarm, and I shall need you to help hive them." So John Brown, he put too much faith in scared black slaves. He thought that once he took over a few plantations and armories, he was going to give them guns, and all the slaves were going to run off their plantations, get guns, and help him. No, that wasn't the case. These slaves were scared. All they knew from the time they were born is slavery. They don't know how to go against massa. These were groups of weak individuals who John Brown was hoping would help him, but they was too scared. They left John Brown alone to die. They left John Brown and his men alone to die. John Brown, his sons, and a few other blacks who wasn't scared that did join him. They actually stayed with John Brown from beginning to the end. So Frederick Douglass said no. Even Tubman did not participate when the day arrived. So according to Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman didn't even participate with John Brown when the day arrived because she too was scared. In October 1959, the raid failed thanks in part to some grave tactical errors on John Brown's part. Tubman's visions came true. A great crowd struck down by two younger heads, Brown's sons, Oliver and Washington, who died in combat, and then the state came for the head of the bearded old man. Brown was captured and put to trial for treason. So in the end, John Brown did not receive the help from Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, at least not in the ways that he wanted to. When he conducted this raid, him, his sons, and a few other blacks who aided him, they were they waited for days for help to come. They were expecting all the other slaves from the local plantations or local areas. The news would be spread that freedom was here and that they would come running to it. But no, they didn't. They left him hanging. They left him to die alone. So that is an unfortunate, tragic story of the most honorable John Brown. May his story and spirit live on. He's a very honorable man for an honorable cause. He was not scared, and he was African American's greatest hero, in my opinion. So yeah, basically, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman were basically Uncle Toms compared to John Brown.